What would drive a man to crawl through a gap no bigger than a sheet of paper? In 1925, Floyd Collins entered a Kentucky cave with dreams of striking it rich. His next few minutes would trigger one of the most dramatic rescue attempts America had ever seen. Above ground, thousands would gather, while below, in the darkness, a man's life hung by a thread. What drives a man to choose darkness over the comfort of his own bed? For Floyd Collins, born June 20th, 1887, in Logan County, Kentucky, caves weren't just holes in the ground, they were his obsession from childhood. By age 6, while most children played in sunlight, young Floyd was already venturing into the underground world that would ultimately seal his fate. This wasn't a passing phase. His passion for caving grew deeper with each passing year. While others slept in their homes, he would often spend nights in the caves, lying on cold stone, mapping the mysteries beneath Kentucky's surface. In 1917, after countless hours of exploration, his dedication finally paid off. Floyd discovered his first significant cave system on his father's farmland. Little did he know, this success would drive him toward both his greatest discovery and his final descent. Welcome to Kentucky's Cave Wars, a ruthless underground economy where fortunes were made not from what grew above the soil, but what lay beneath it. In this battleground stood the mighty Mammoth Cave, the world's largest cave system, surrounded by countless smaller caves scattered across private lands like hidden treasures. This land was so full of caves that farming was nearly impossible. Instead, cave tourism became the way to survive. Cave owners competed fiercely for visitors, turning this quiet area into a battleground for attracting tourists to their underground wonders. Floyd Collins knew the rules of this subterranean game. Discovering a cave wasn't enough. You had to turn it into a moneymaker. When he found a promising cave on another's land, he cleverly negotiated a 50-50 profit split with the owner. But the real challenge lay ahead, transforming raw, dangerous passages into something that would attract paying visitors. In the Cave Wars, location and spectacle were everything. January 1925. Floyd Collins was about to make his biggest discovery. For weeks he had worked in Sand Cave, removing rocks and sand with his bare hands. The cave had a perfect location, just 100 yards from the main highway, where lots of tourists drove by every day. But in Kentucky's competitive cave business, having a good location wasn't enough. Floyd knew he needed to find something special inside, something so amazing that people would choose his cave instead of the many others in the area. What he didn't know was that January 1925 would change his life forever. On January 30th, 1925, Floyd Collins grabbed his kerosene lantern and entered Sand Cave. He had no idea this would be his final journey underground. The path ahead was terrifying, a twisted, narrow tunnel where he had to crawl and squeeze through inch by inch. Soon, he reached a place so scary that locals named it the turnaround room. Most cave explorers would take one look and leave, but not Floyd. What scared others away was a tiny hole, just 9 inches high, no wider than a piece of paper. It was so tight that even taking a breath meant thinking twice. This was where the real test began. Floyd wasn't like other cavers. This tiny gap that scared everyone else away was his chance for success. As he pushed through, sharp crystals tore at his clothes. Every move had to be perfect in this tight space. After squeezing through, he lowered himself 10 feet down a narrow shaft. What he found next took his breath away, a beautiful chamber filled with pure white gypsum crystals that no human had ever seen before. Floyd's heart raced with excitement. This was it, the amazing sight that would make his cave special. This discovery could change his life and bring in the tourists he needed. But he had no idea that his moment of triumph would soon turn into a nightmare. His victory was short-lived. The kerosene lantern started running low on fuel, a deadly warning that it was time to leave. Floyd had to hurry back through the same dangerous path. He climbed up the wall and squeezed through the narrow crack, then had to lie flat in the sloped tunnel that stretched 140 feet back to safety. Then, disaster struck. As he pushed his lantern ahead, it caught on the rough cave wall and flipped over. In an instant, his only light was gone. Floyd was now trapped in complete darkness, 140 feet from the cave entrance. with no way to see the dangers around him. In total darkness, Floyd faced the scariest journey of his life. Lying on his back, he used his legs to slide over the sharp rocks. He knew this tunnel well after weeks of work, but one wrong move in the dark could be deadly. Then it happened. His foot knocked loose a stone. Suddenly, rocks started falling all around him. A heavy stone, weighing 15 kilograms, smashed onto his ankle. As more rocks crashed down, Floyd screamed in pain, choking on dust and debris. He tried frantically to free his leg, but things only got worse. His arms were now pinned against his body by fallen rocks. Floyd was trapped, unable to move, deep inside the dark cave. This wasn't Floyd's first time being stuck in a cave. Crystal Cave had trapped him for 2 days just a year before, but this time was different. This time was worse. He was alone in a tunnel, barely 16 inches high. His crushed foot and body were buried under rocks and dirt. Cold water kept dripping on his face, and he couldn't even lift his arms to wipe it away. Sharp rocks dug into his back as he lay in muddy water that was 50 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to slowly drain the warmth from his body. In the pitch darkness, Floyd could only wait and hope someone would find him. For 23 long hours, Floyd went through a cycle of screaming for help until he passed out from exhaustion. Nobody knew he was trapped. His only hope was his jacket, still hanging at the cave entrance. Finally, Jewel Estes, the landowner's teenage son, spotted the jacket. When he called into the cave, Floyd's weak voice answered back. Hope flickered, but it didn't last long. Though Jewel managed to squeeze through the first tight spot, he froze at the turnaround room. The 9-inch gap that led to Floyd was too terrifying. He couldn't go further. Floyd was still trapped, now knowing help was so close, yet so far. Help finally arrived. Floyd's 22-year-old brother Homer. Being small and having some cave experience, Homer was perfect for the rescue. He reached the cave at 4 p.m. on Saturday, when Floyd had already spent 30 terrible hours without food or water. Homer did what others couldn't. He squeezed through the first tight spot and crawled through 100 feet of narrow tunnel to reach the turnaround room. The space was so tight, it kept his body almost straight up. He couldn't even bend down properly to help Floyd, who was buried in rocks up to his chest. Every attempt to clear the rocks was a struggle. The passage was too narrow to properly move, and there was nowhere to put the debris he managed to remove. Homer had to twist his body in painful ways, just to reach the rocks trapping his brother. Homer managed to bring Floyd some coffee and sausage, the first food his brother had tasted in over a day. Then began his desperate rescue attempt. For 16 straight hours, Homer worked non-stop. Up and down the narrow shaft he went, pulling at rocks and digging at the floor, trying anything to free his brother. When he finally came out at 8 o'clock Sunday morning, he was so exhausted he could hardly stand, and Floyd was still trapped. News of Floyd's situation spread like wildfire. Soon, crowds of curious onlookers gathered at the cave entrance. Then came William Skeets Miller, a reporter who would change everything. At just 117 pounds, Miller was light enough to squeeze through to Floyd when most others couldn't. Miller's dramatic reports caught the nation's attention. The story of Floyd Collins became so big, it ranked as the third largest non-political news between the two world wars. Even President Calvin Coolidge was following the rescue attempts. The scene outside turned into a bizarre spectacle. What started with 1,000 people exploded to 10,000 curious onlookers. Over 4,500 vehicles jammed the roads within a mile. Food stands, Ferris wheels, and jugglers transformed a rescue mission into a carnival, all while Floyd lay trapped in darkness below. Enter Lieutenant Robert Burton, a firefighter with a new plan. He became the third person to reach Floyd, carrying ropes and a harness. But the rescue attempt turned into torture. When they pulled, the harness only crushed Floyd harder against the sharp rocks, leaving him gasping for air. Another plan had failed. On February 4th, disaster struck. A massive cave-in sealed the narrow passage to Floyd, cutting off their only way to reach him. With time running out, rescuers had to try something desperate, digging straight down through 55 feet of earth to reach Floyd's chamber. The Kentucky Rock and Asphalt Company joined forces with the National Guard for this last-ditch effort. Their only sign that Floyd was still alive came from an ingenious setup, a light bulb around his neck. Engineers watched its electrical patterns carefully, each flicker showing Floyd was still breathing somewhere in the darkness below. What should have been a 30-hour rescue turned into 12 days of agony. Everything that could go wrong did. Equipment broke down. Hard soil slowed progress. Heavy rains flooded the worksite, and workers argued over methods. Then, on February 13th, the light bulb around Floyd's neck, his only source of warmth and their only way to know he was alive, went dark. 3 days later, on February 16th, 1925, rescuers finally broke through, but they were too late. Floyd Collins was dead. The coroner's report revealed an incredible detail. Floyd had lived for 14 days in that dark prison, surviving on just drops of water. Death wasn't the end of Floyd Collins' story. It was just the beginning of a bizarre aftermath. For months, his body stayed in the very cave that killed him before being moved to his family's farm. Then came dentist Harry B. Thomas, who bought the property and turned tragedy into tourism. He put Floyd's body on display in a glass coffin, charging visitors to see the cave explorer's remains. But in 1929, the story took an even darker twist. Someone stole Floyd's body. When found, his feet were missing. To this day, no one knows who took them or why. The story grew even darker when Floyd's own father, Lee Collins, made a fateful decision. For $10,000, he sold the property to Thomas, unknowingly giving away all rights to his son's body. For 64 years, Floyd Collins couldn't rest in peace. Only in 1989, when the National Park Service took over the cave, did his journey finally end. At last, he was properly buried in the Mammoth Cave Baptist Cemetery, free from the spotlight that had followed him even in death. In the end, Floyd Collins got exactly what he wanted, but not how he imagined it. Sand Cave did become famous, drawing crowds from all over America. But instead of showing off his crystal chamber discovery, Floyd himself became the main attraction. First, as a trapped man fighting for life, then as a body on display. Today, Sand Cave stands sealed and silent, its entrance forever closed, like a tomb holding the echo of Floyd's last adventure.